New reporting is revealing troubling accusations of sexual abuse at independent fundamental Baptist churches across the country. An investigation by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram uncovered 412 allegations of sexual misconduct against more than 200 people, including current and former church officials. The paper also uncovered a pattern in which those accused of abuse would be moved to other parishes, and the accusations against were not reported to law enforcement. Joining me now from Fort Worth, Texas, is Sarah Smith. She's an investigative reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the lead reporter for this investigation. Thanks so much for joining us, Sarah. How did this investigation begin, and what type of allegations did you hear from people who said that they had been abused?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This investigation started back in March when there were 2 arrests for sexual abuse at a local independent fundamental Baptist church within a week of each other. I started asking congregants what was going on, and they pointed me to a cultural problem within the church, and those people connected me to people across the country who were alleging similar misconduct. And these allegations range from forcible rape to child molestation to inappropriate talk during counseling.
Well, your investigation found a, quote, network of churches and schools has often covered up the crimes and helped relocate the offenders. Explain to us how that worked and why church officials felt that was the proper response to allegations of sexual abuse.
Well, the independent fundamental Baptist churches, as they say in their name, are independent, but there is this informal network that's formed by friendships between pastors and Bible colleges. So if someone has an offender in their congregation, they are able to ship them off to another church, be it with that new church's knowledge or perhaps not. If the person recommending the alleged abuser is an influential pastor, they won't be questioned. And there's this mentality that if you expose this abuse, you're opening your church to criticism and you're hurting the cause of Christ, which doesn't allow people to be saved. So there's an extreme incentive in this mindset to cover up the abuse.
So then how much of a role did the culture of the independent fundamental Baptist church play in allowing so many of these allegations to go unreported to law enforcement?
The culture in the independent fundamental Baptist church plays a tremendous role in keeping these abuse allegations quiet. The pastor is considered the ultimate authority, and it's unthinkable to go against the advice of your pastor. So if your pastor downplays the allegations, if your pastor says don't report to law enforcement, then it's extremely hard to go against that recommendation. Women and children are at the very bottom of the hierarchy in many of these churches, so their voices aren't heard as strongly when they do speak up to report abuse. The churches also preach a doctrine of separation, which means they have to be separate from non-believers and the rest of the world, and that in many cases is interpreted to include authorities.
So from your conversations then with survivors, what led them to decide to eventually go ahead and report these allegations, given that culture that you just spelled out?
It was extremely difficult for every single survivor that I talked to, but the reason that I think all of them wanted to report the allegations and wanted to speak is because they thought it had gone on too long, and they wanted to stop this kind of abuse from happening to anybody else.
And tell us about some of the struggles the abuse survivors have faced.
It's been extremely difficult for, I think, every abuse survivor I've talked to. They have years in therapy. They blame themselves for what happened. They're scared of the churches that they've left. And in these churches, you're also taught that if you leave, God will strike you down and punish you. So even people who haven't been sexually abused, who have left these churches, are afraid that when something bad happens to them, that's God punishing them for leaving the church.
Finally, Sarah, let me ask you, you have talked to a number of people, survivors, those accused of abuse, and church officials accused of covering it up. What has been their response, their reaction to your reporting, and what do you see happening next?
So far, the response has been largely positive. We've had a tremendous number of survivors step forward to say, this happened to me too, and I feel brave enough to tell my story. There have been independent fundamental Baptist pastors who are speaking out against this abuse, who are really happy to see these stories shared. I've gotten some pushback from people who think that we're out to destroy the church, but overwhelmingly, it's just an outpouring of people saying "Me too."
All right, an incredible investigation. Sarah Smith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.